Let's be honest, 2020 was a pretty rough year. Here's to hoping that 2021 will be just a little bit better. Maybe we'll even be able to buy graphics cards again. Today's video is brought to you by Lexar and the NM610 PCI Express NVMe drive. Available in 250GB, 500GB, and 1TB capacities, it makes the perfect upgrade for your laptop or desktop PC. Featuring NVMe 1.3 Gen 3x4 and speeds up to 3.5 times faster than SATA, it's the surefire way to supercharge your PC. Get into your games faster with the Lexar NM610 NVMe drive. Click the link down in the video description to learn more. Welcome back to Craft Computing, everyone. As always, I'm Jeff. In my hands, or more specifically in the computer next to me I should say, is the all-new Sapphire RX 6800 Nitro Plus card. It is the brand new card from AMD, rocking the RDNA 2 architecture, 60 compute units, 3840 stream processors, and 16GB of GDDR6. Now, while I did quip about graphics cards availability in the intro of this video, I really was being serious. This is the first next-generation card that I've had hands-on time with. As such, this review isn't going to be a top-to-bottom, which graphics card should you buy in 2021, because I think that answer is still none of them. But I am going to take a look at the RX 6800 versus the previous generation AMD flagship, the RX 5700 XT. Rambo decided he wanted to take a look at the brand new graphics card as well, so we'll give his opinion at the end of this episode. And people wonder why I often don't use AIOs in a lot of my builds. This is why. Air cooling all the way. With all that out of the way, let's finally get this review started. The Sapphire Nitro Plus RX 6800 is a fantastic looking graphics card. However, it also follows one of the industry trends that I like the least, and that is triple slot GPUs. Graphics card makers started moving in this direction en masse in the last generation, with the RX 5000 series from AMD and the RTX 2000 series from Nvidia, and I don't have to like it. I am a user who still utilizes quite a few PCI Express slots in my PC. My PCs are usually more than just gaming PCs with a single graphics card on board. Now, for the gamers out there, it still makes perfect sense. However, for other people who do use expansion cards, it is a little bit of a hindrance. Official specs for the Nitro Plus RX 6800 state it is a 290-watt TDP card. However, in my testing, at least according to Hardware Info, I never reached above 227 watts at stock speeds. Whether or not that power figure is accurate, I'm actually not 100% sure. But what I can tell you is the GPU ran cool and quiet the entire time during testing. Seriously, this is about as loud as it ever got. The fans did peak at about 1500 RPM under full load, and we saw a hotspot on the GPU of 89 degrees Celsius and an average GPU package temp of about 70 degrees Celsius. While the temperatures are very impressive, what blew me away about the Nitro Plus were the clock speeds. We hit a max boost of 2308 MHz and a sustained game clock speed of 2184 MHz over a 10-minute test. That means we're seeing about 200 MHz higher than AMD's promised game clock. So, it's cool, quiet, and looks darn good through a case window. But at the end of the day, what matters is how well does it perform. And I'm happy to say, it does not disappoint. Now I know AMD and Nvidia are both trying to push the concept of 4K gaming. In fact, it's even on the side of the box here, 4K UHD gaming. I don't think 4K is the next leap for gaming. I think the next leap for gaming is high frame rate, middle of the road resolution, something like 1080p 240 or 1440 144 Hz. So that's how I'm going to do my testing today. Our test bench for today is rocking an AMD Ryzen 3800 XT, because I can't get a hold of the new CPUs either, 64GB of Patriot Viper 3600 MHz C18 memory, an MSI MPG B550 Gaming Edge Wi-Fi motherboard, and a Silicon Power 500GB NVMe Gen 3x4 SSD. Starting with a couple synthetic tests in 3D Mark, we see the RX 6800 post a very impressive score of 10,770 in Firestrike Extreme. In fact, that is a 63% improvement over the previous generation RX 5700 XT. And the fun doesn't stop there. In Time Spy Extreme, we saw a 72% improvement on the graphics score over the 5700 XT, meaning that in both DX11 and DX12, we are seeing significantly better rasterization performance. Moving on to our gaming results, and I'm going to start with the one weird one. The one where the RX 5700 XT beat the 6800, and that is Project Cars 3. Now I really can't explain this one. I will say when I first saw these numbers, I thought I had reversed the results in my head. However, that wasn't the case. I did go back and do a driver uninstall and retest both cards completely. However, the results stayed exactly the same, so I'm going to give you them exactly as I received them. Now, it could be a couple different things causing this. Number one, the game just came out in August of 2020, so maybe there haven't been any driver optimizations written for the RX 6000 series cards, which didn't drop until November. Or maybe the developers just can't get hold of new graphics cards to test in their systems either. Moving right along to the oldest game in my test suite in Grand Theft Auto V, which was released in 2015. However, it is still very heavily played online, so I feel these test results are still very relevant. At its highest settings, this game is usually not all that friendly towards AMD cards. Look no further than the 5700 XT results to back that up, with an average of 81 FPS at 1080p and 57 FPS at 1440. The RX 6800 might be starting to buck that trend, however, seeing a 47% improvement at 1080p, jumping up to 119 frames per second. At 1440p, we jumped a full 87% to 106 frames per second on average. What's really interesting here, though, is the 0.1% low of 58, seeing as how the 5700 XT only managed an average of 57 frames per second. The 2016 reboot of Doom is likely going to be on its way out as a benchmark title for me, mainly because I seem to have broken it. You see, the engine has a max frame rate of about 200 FPS, and the 5700 XT at both 1080p and 1440 were able to hit that quite easily. We saw virtually identical results out of the RX 6800, meaning there's really no more performance we're going to be able to pull out of this game. The other reason I'm going to be retiring Doom as a benchmark title is because of its successor, Doom Eternal. Not only is Doom Eternal faster at ultra settings than Doom is at ultra settings, there also doesn't seem to be a frame rate cap, or at least not one that I can find. At 1080p, the RX 6800 managed a pedestrian 359 frames per second, and I was unreasonably excited when I saw the results for the 0.1% low at 202. At both 1080p and 1440, we saw around a 60% improvement over the 5700 XT, which lines up almost exactly with our synthetic tests, and to be quite honest with you, I'm not used to seeing linear results like that. Hitman 2 remains one of my favorite games to play when I'm not benchmarking graphics cards, especially if I don't have to play through the prologue level, and it wasn't exactly a bad experience on the 5700 XT. At 1080p, we got an average of 164 frames per second with a 0.1% low of 69. Nice. And at 1440, we got 101 frames per second on average with a 0.1% low of 54. Those aren't exactly bad scores, however they could always be a little bit better. 50% better, in fact, with the RX 6800 seeing an average of 246 frames per second and a 0.1% low of just 78. At 1440p, the difference is even more dramatic, with a score of 165 frames per second and a 0.1% low of 77. The trend continues in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, with an average of 172 frames per second at 1080p and 147 frames per second at 1440. That's an increase of 23 and 56% respectively over the 5700 XT. Two more games and then I will let you go. First off, Red Dead Redemption 2 saw the smallest improvement of the day of just 24%. At 1080p, the 5700 XT managed an average of 88 frames per second with a 0.1% low of 46. The 6800 bumped that up to 109 frames per second and a 0.1% low of 55 respectively. To be fair to the 6800, Red Dead Redemption 2 is by far one of the more demanding games that I test, especially when you crank everything up to high and ultra settings, and I'd say the 6800 handled it admirably. We did see a slightly higher increase of 35% at 1440, with a score of 92 frames per second on average and a 0.1% low of 58. And finally, Wreckfest shows there is still room for improvement, jumping up from 178 frames per second to 265 at 1080p and 140 frames per second to 220 frames per second at 1440. Wrapping things up here, the Sapphire RX 6800 Nitro Plus definitely does not disappoint when it comes to performance. In fact, compared to the 5700 XT, we see improvements of about 27% on average at 1080p and around 45% at 1440. The really cool thing is it manages to do all that while drawing only about 7% more power. So why did we see a bigger difference at 1440p than we did at 1080p? Well, I think the answer is staring you in the face in the Doom 2016 benchmark. See, we pretty much broke the game engine, because it has a frame cap of 200 frames per second, and there's something else in the system that is bogging it down to a 0.1% low of 120. We may be starting to hit a ceiling of what is possible out of game engines, and it's going to be really interesting to watch the market, especially over the next couple years as graphics cards get faster and faster, and our monitors are finally able to keep up the pace. So how do I say this in the simplest terms possible? AMD's third highest card in the RX 6800 right now is really fast. If you're interested in picking up the Sapphire RX 6800 Nitro Plus for yourself, I will have links down in the video description as soon as they're available. But in the meantime, make sure to drop this video a like and subscribe to Craft Computing if you haven't done so already. Follow me on Twitter at Craft Computing, and if you like the content you see on this channel and want to help support me in what I do, consider joining the Patreon or Float Plane. Links are also down in the video description. To get your weekly dose of beer and tech news, make sure to tune in to Talking Heads every Wednesday night at 8 p.m. Pacific Time, right here on YouTube, or in podcast form over on Anchor.fm, or wherever your favorite podcasts are found. And that's going to do it for me in this one. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video. Cheers, guys. Beer for today is from Shakopee Brewhall over in Shakopee, Minnesota. It is the Fine Whatever New England IPA, 6.5%. The can art isn't much to look at, but I love that name. Not only is that hazy, that's not even letting light through. That's crazy. Boy, that is thick. It is thick like orange juice with pulp. Flavor-wise, I'm getting maybe some orange, maybe a little bit of grapefruit. It's definitely more on the citrusy, kind of tangy side of things, rather than the overly acidic sour that you normally get from a New England. Overall, definitely not bad. I'd like a little bit more hop flavor out of this. I'd like it to be a little bit bolder as far as the hops go, because this is a hazy IPA, and it tastes like a hazy IPA, but it's kind of muted. It's not as big and bold as I would expect one to be. One of my main criticisms of a lot of hazies is you tend to get that acid burn building up the further down you get in the drink. This one's not really giving me that, but I will say it is just as drying on the mouth, which isn't really great when trying to film a video, because I find myself doing this a lot to be able to talk. Like I said, it is a pretty good beer. It's not my favorite, but it's not anything I'd be ashamed to order at a tap house. So it's fine. Whatever.